with her 2 children, and Marina was now separated from her husband with 1 child and one that's going to be born during this time, okay? And so they had a lot in common and they liked each other. They lived in Irving, Texas, okay, outside of Dallas. Lee Harvey Oswald gets this job at the Texas School Book Depository, and he lives in a boarding house we talked about on North Beckley Street, and he then would take a bus to work. And he would go see his wife on the weekends and try to reconcile things, and that's a whole other story that we'll talk about a little bit later, but I just wanted you to know that. So this boarding house that he stayed at, just so you know, he actually lived there for 6 weeks before the assassination, and he paid $8 a week to live there, okay? 6 weeks, $8 a week. Now I'll show you a picture of this because I've been in this boarding house. It's kind of a long house. It's kind of wide and long. And it had 18 total rooms in this boarding house, and tenants paid between $8 a week and $24 a week to stay there, depending on which room you got. Oswald's, and I'll show it to you in a picture, his was $8 a week. That's what he paid to stay there in that boarding house at 1026 North Beckley, excuse me. And it was about a 5 to 8 minute ride for Oswald daily from the boarding house to the Texas School Book Depository if he got on the bus. And most often he got on the bus. Like I said, the bus stop was very close to his house. I don't think he ever walked, probably. But anyway, it was about a 5 to 8 minute bus ride. Okay, just so you know, kind of get a feeling for that. Okay, now kiddos, we got to go back to Parkland Hospital, because something's going to happen after they pronounce the president dead. That's not the end of the story, is it? So we're going back to Parkland Hospital. So we're talking about continuing events back at Parkland Hospital. What's going on in Parkland Hospital while Oswald is fleeing the scene of the murder, killing a police officer and getting caught in the Texas theater? What's going on back in Parkland, okay? All right, now this is really important you understand. Since President Kennedy was killed in Dallas, Texas state law required the president's autopsy be done in Dallas by civilian doctors. That's the law. You get killed somewhere, the autopsy and investigation happens there. Okay? But the only difference here is this is the President of the United States. Now, the Dallas medical examiner that insisted that Kennedy's autopsy be done in Dallas was Dr. Earl Rose. And he was emphatic. Texas state law says that he was killed here. Texas state law says the autopsy will be done here by doctors at Parkland Hospital. He was absolutely relentless in his opinion on it. And that's what the law said, so that probably is what should have happened. Well, instead, the Kennedy camp plans to take the president's body from Parkland back to Washington, D.C. They are not interested in staying there until that autopsy is completed. Now, who was the man that was equally as insistent on the other side of things as Dr. Earl Rose was of having Kennedy stay? Who was equally insistent that they were not going to stay? They were going back to D.C. Who would be most responsible for the safety of the presidency now? Which one? Which Secret Service agent? No, Kellerman. Roy Kellerman is insisting that no, we're taking the president's body back to D.C. So he and Earl Rose are like this, kiddos. I mean, they are face to face, the F word coming out, guns raised, the whole 9 yards. Okay, this is not a good scene. Now, there are 3 reasons why Kellerman was so insistent, despite the fact that he indeed was going to violate Texas state law. He had 3 reasons that he was taking the president's body back to Washington. And it kind of goes, it's a domino effect. One leads to the other. What might be the first reason that you probably would think of that he wanted to get the dead president's body back to Washington? Why would he want to do that? Who's he got in a room in Parkland surrounded by Secret Service agents? Lyndon Johnson. So here's how this domino effect goes. Kellerman was insistent that he take the president's body back because, number one, he strongly believed that Vice President Johnson, for security reasons, had to get back to where? D.C. That was his first priority. We have got to get Lyndon Johnson, who no doubt is going to be the new President of the United States, although he hasn't been sworn in yet, no doubt he's got to be safe, and he's not going to be safe here. We got to get him back to D.C. Now, the reason this is a domino effect, and the reason it has anything to do with President Kennedy's body, they certainly could have put Johnson on a different plane and took him home, right? Or I guess the president, the dead president, they could have taken him on a different plane. Because remember, Johnson flew there separately, remember? Well, the problem was, the second domino is Vice President Johnson was refusing to leave Dallas without Mrs. Kennedy. He was not going to leave Mrs. Kennedy there. So Vice President Johnson said, I am not leaving to go to D.C. unless Mrs. Kennedy's leaving. And the third domino is Mrs. Kennedy wasn't leaving without what? The President's body. So there are the three reasons why Secret Service agent Roy Kellerman was so insistent that they get back to D.C. One, he wanted Johnson back in D.C. for safety reasons. Two, Johnson was not going back to D.C. unless Mrs. Kennedy was going. And three, Mrs. Kennedy was not going without her husband. That was the thing. Now, this is how crazy it got. This is what Dr. Rose later quoted saying about this confrontation. You don't have to write it down, just listen. This is what he said. I was in their way. I was face to face with Secret Service agent Roy Kellerman, and I was trying to explain to him that Texas law applied in the instant case of the death of the president, and that the law required an autopsy be performed in Texas. No one was in charge of the situation. Agent Kellerman tried 3 tactics to have his way. He asserted his identity as representing the Secret Service. He appealed for sympathy to Mrs. Kennedy, and he used body language to attempt to bully, or should I say intimidate me. At no time did I feel I was in physical danger because he and the others were armed. I was not looking at Agent Kellerman's gun, I was looking at his eyes, and they were very intense. His eyes said he meant to get the president's body back to Washington. This disagreement between Agent Kellerman and Dr. Rose led to heated discussions, horrible swearing, and pulling of guns by both the Dallas Police Department, who were supporting Rose, and the Secret Service, who were supporting Kellerman. This was ugly. This was an ugly deal. Guess who witnesses all of this? Jackie Kennedy witnesses every bit of this. Somebody's got to step in and solve the problem. Now, come on, kids, really get me excited here. Who stepped in that we've talked about that tried to come up with a solution, because this was really ugly? Come on, who's the old guy that fixes everything? Kenneth O'Donnell. Yes! Kenneth O'Donnell steps in and he makes a proposal to try to get this heated situation under control, because it was getting bad. It's getting what we call Western in Parkland Hospital. Cussing, threats, guns pulled. I mean, it was getting ugly. Well, the president had a personal physician with him at all times, and his name was Admiral George Berkeley. Admiral George Berkeley. And he was the president's personal physician. And O'Donnell proposed that Admiral Berkeley would stay with the president's body, not letting anybody touch it or fool with it or whatever, until an autopsy would be done back in Washington, D.C. So Kenneth O'Donnell steps in. He can see this is crazy. He says, listen, let's have the president's personal physician, Admiral George Berkeley, stay right with the body, not move. This is him right here. Not move away from that body until we get it back to Washington, and we'll perform the autopsy there. Well, nobody had agreed to anything yet. They were still talking about it. And while they were talking about it, O'Donnell tells Secret Service agent Clint Hill to go get a casket for the president. They don't have a casket there. They got to move him. So O'Donnell's proposed this, but what's going to happen if they don't agree? They're going to take him anyway. That's what they're going to do. So he tells Clint Hill, while we're talking about this, go get a casket to put the president's body in. So Agent Hill calls a local mortuary. He tells them to deliver the best casket they have available to Parkland Hospital immediately. So while they're discussing O'Donnell's proposal to see if they're going to let him go or not, O'Donnell's telling Clint Hill, hey, go get us a casket. So he calls the local mortuary and says, send the best casket that you have in stock to Parkland Hospital. Well, the casket arrives, the president's body's placed in the casket, and the body was taken forcibly from Parkland. So they didn't really agree, did they? And they just basically said, get the blank out of my way, we're taking them. They got him in the casket and took him. And it was at 2:08 p.m. that casket was loaded into a hearse outside Parkland Hospital and departed for Love Field, where they would put the casket on Air Force One and fly it back to D.C. Who's left to worry about? Well, Jackie's going to go with the body. Yeah. So Lyndon Johnson, only when he's convinced that the president's body's going and Mrs. Kennedy's going with it, does he then agree to leave, and they all depart at 2:08 p.m. 2:08 p.m. The casket was loaded into the hearse outside Parkland Hospital. Now, was Johnson in the hearse? No, he was driven separately to Love Field. But Mrs. Kennedy and the body, whatever. Okay? All right. That's going to take us to our next subtopic, which is departure back to D.C. And we will not get this completely done, but we'll get a start anyway. And there's some important information. You know, then we're going to talk about something I want to talk about concerning life. Okay, the hearse that carried President Kennedy's body from Parkland, arrived at Love Field at 2:14 p.m. So they left at what time? 2:08. Only took 6 minutes to get there from Parkland. Not too far away, really, especially when you're driving fast. Now, what would be the next decision? You think about, you're in the middle of this thing. You're either with the president's body or you're in the airplane, part of that crew. What's your next decision? As you know, the president, here they drive up, they're pulling the casket out. What's the next question? Where are you going to put it? Okay, where are you going to put it? The Secret Service had already made the decision that the casket was not going where? Underneath, like a piece of luggage. They absolutely made that decision. We are not having the president's body be put underneath the airplane like a piece of luggage. Not going to happen. They already had made that decision. And that decision was made prior to them getting there, and as a result, 2 rows of seats had been taken out of Air Force One to make room for the president's coffin before it ever arrived. So as soon as they made the decision to leave Parkland Hospital, a call was made to the airplane. They said, get 2 rows of seats out and make room for the president's coffin. Well, they arrive, like I mentioned, at Love Field. The president's casket is taken out of the ambulance and they're going up the mobile staircase, which wasn't easy because this casket was quite heavy. And they get to the door, and what is the problem? It's too wide. The handles make it too wide to get in the door of the airplane. So what they do? What? Before that, you're pretty close. They broke off, no, they wouldn't take the body out, but they broke the handles off. And they actually lifted this coffin without handles. And didn't tip it sideways, but definitely had to tip the coffin somewhat to get it in the airplane, get it in the door. Now, there was a flight steward aboard Air Force One by the name of Sergeant John Hames. John Hames was one of the flight attendants. John Hames. Here's a picture of him here if you're interested in a picture of the airplane. And this is what he was quoted as saying about this. He said, I remember they broke off one of the handles trying to get the casket through the rear door of the Boeing 707. I put the broken handle with the casket when they took it off at the airport in Washington after we arrived. So he actually kept track of that broken handle. Here was the next problem. once they got in the door, what would it do? Wouldn't make the corner. Wouldn't make the corner. The airplane's not made for coffins. You need to think about it. Up top, anyway. Well, because of that, a part of the plane entrance was sawed off so that the coffin could make the corner inside the door. I mean, seriously, can you imagine this? You've had this, and we've been talking for a long time, but this happened in a 2-hour period of time, about from shots fired, 12:30, 1:30, 2:30, in that area. I mean, we're talking about 2 hours of time here, and now they're trying to get the president out of there, and they can't even get the coffin onto the airplane. Now, once inside the aircraft with the coffin, Mrs. Kennedy chose to sit with the coffin of her deceased husband. And again, Flight Steward Sergeant John Haynes was later quoted as saying this about that moment. He said, "On the way back to Washington, the only thing Mrs. Kennedy requested was a glass of water. She refused to change her blood-stained clothes. She wanted everybody to see the blood on her clothes and realized what happened to her husband in Dallas." And that's a true story, and there's more to that, which we'll talk about later. Well, once inside the aircraft, Kenneth O'Donnell wanted that plane to get off the ground. Let's get out of here. Why? Now, we're going to end with this. Why do you want that plane off the ground, Taylor? Oh, you're dang right. He was afraid that the police in Texas were going to pull up at any time, FBI, whoever, that were Dallas branched, and make them take that casket off of the airplane because they were breaking Texas law. So O'Donnell gets in that airplane, he says, "Let's roll. Let's get this plane off the ground." Because he was scared to death that the Dallas Police Department, anybody else that was upset about the situation, would come and take the casket off. So this is what we'll end with, a couple things. Who did he go to say, "Hey, let's get this plane off let's get it out of here"? Okay, not yet. Good guess. So there was a general there by the name of Godfrey McHugh. Godfrey McHugh. And he was a top military aide to President Kennedy who was on the trip to Dallas. And O'Donnell goes and tells General Godfrey McHugh, who's Kennedy's top military aide in Dallas, "Let's get this airplane in the air." Well, General McHugh then, kiddos, went to the pilot, James Swindoll, and asked him, "How come we're not taking off?" And what was his answer? "I haven't been given orders to take off yet. And tomorrow I'm going to tell you why and who was supposed to give those orders." Okay? All right, now we're going to talk about something. Might be a little uncomfortable, hopefully not. Been thinking a little bit because of something that happened to me yesterday that I was pretty pleased with and surprised with. Who remembers this? Who remembers D.J. Smith and the richest man in town? Short memory? Nobody remembers this guy? Did you not go over to an assembly at the middle school and listen to him last year? Guy in the grocery, but what was his main focus on this? What advice did he give you? Right, thank you notes, right? So I'm going to tell you a couple stories. Yesterday, I get to school about 7:30. Yesterday was Wednesday, right? What happened Tuesday night? Battle of the Buildings. Got over about what time? 7:38. 12 hours after that, I get this note. "Dear Randy, thank you so much for announcing for the Battle of the Buildings. We really appreciate it. Your added commentary added so much and you had everyone laughing. Once again, thank you so much for your support. Sincerely, Lissy Hughes, Brianna Scholl." 12 hours after that happened. Last year I had 56 graduation gifts I sent to graduates. You know how many thank yous I got? 23 out of 56. That's pitiful. So, what we're going to do today is we're going to give you a little assignment. I'm going to give you a card, and I want you to think about someone that gave you something, said something complimentary to you, did something that results in a thank you. And I want you to write a thank you to that person on this card, and I want you to address it to that person, and I want you to turn it in tomorrow at the start of the period. I will put the postage on it, and I'll mail them for you. So I want you to think about this. We don't do this enough. You guys are going to have graduation announcements, and you're going to get lots of gifts. And your goal in life, I don't care if you get 100 gifts and it takes you 100 years to do it, is you do what? Write them a thank you card. Okay, one more story. I go around the neighborhood, and I have a four-wheeler with a snowplow on it, and I have a lot of elderly people in my neighborhood. And when it snows, I go around a 3-block radius and clear off their front walk so they don't have to. Okay? Every once in a while, I'll find a batch of cookies at my door. I'll have somebody send me a nice thank you card. Well, day before yesterday, the family that does the Memorial Volleyball Tournament, Chefs? Sheaves, yeah. Mr. and Mrs. Sheaf, they live a couple blocks down, but I do their walk. They sent me a really nice card thanking me, and also sent me a gift certificate to the Country Club restaurant. I don't know if it's $20 or $500, no idea. So in that case, I sent them a thank you for thanking me because they enclosed something with that. If they just sent me a card, I probably wouldn't have responded. But it's really important you do that because people get irritated, especially old people like me, when you don't figure that out. Does everybody have a card? So now I'm going to give you some envelopes. This is your assignment, and I'm going to grade this. We're going to put this in the grade book. This is the Life Learning AP US History program. I want you to think of somebody that's given you something, said something complimentary to you. Maybe, I'm trying to think here, maybe Tigner did really well in the Mile City tournament, and some guy down the street said, hey, Morgan, great job, way to go. It can be as little as that type of thing. But I want you to think about somebody